Hey y'all, my name is Gabriel Abounty. I'm here with the Dallas Public Library for Nature Expo 2023. We're capturing natural Dallas out here at Big Spring in the Great Trinity Forest, and who better than to show us around than our guest, Ben Sandifer. But I'll let Ben introduce the site.
Hello, my name is Ben Sandifer. I'm an honorary North Texas Master Naturalist, part of the Texas Master Naturalist network here in the state of Texas. This morning, we're going to go on a walk, a wonderful walk, at one of the great historic landmarks of Dallas, Texas, and Texas in general, and that's Big Spring in the heart of the Great Trinity Forest. It's one of Dallas' newest historic landmarks in the city of Dallas, but it's also likely its oldest. This place has a unique human history that dates back many thousands of years and has a wonderful tale to tell of flora and fauna. My interaction and my personal story of the Great Trinity Forest and how I began to explore it began in the early 2000s by mountain bike. After the city of Dallas passed a large bond referendum to enhance the Great Trinity Forest with different aspects of flood control, recreation, and conservation efforts, I became interested in seeing what was down in this. As a native Dallasite, I wanted to see what was in this part of Dallas. So I started poking around and exploring a lot of fascinating places that I'd read about in old journals and articles in different libraries around town, at SMU and even the DallasPublicLibrary on the 8th floor. And my interest, one of them was Big Spring. I'd read about this naturally existing spring and a long history that dated back to the earliest pioneer settlers of the area, and then also some of the archaeology that had been documented on the site. So through mountain biking and through conversations across chain link fences and barbed wire fences, talking with people out working in their yards and things, I began a familiarization on a personal level with not just the Great Trinity Forest, but also this really special place called Big Spring. We're now just inside the gate of Big Spring, and is what is the historic landmark for the city of Dallas. Behind me is the Great Trinity Forest, and currently we're standing at a place that's a topographic high for Big Spring, so the highest elevation inside the landmark. This area is dominated by prairie species in the prairie habitat. So we're in the Blackland Prairie Province in this section of Texas, and most of the plants that are behind me, other than some hedge parsley invasives, are native plants that are indicative of prairie area. We can hear the sounds of chickadees, indigo buntings, painted buntings, dickcissels, which are the troubadours of the prairie that are behind us nesting right now, and a wide variety of wildlife that call the prairie home. As we move down the hillside here and down into the topographic low, we're going to be entering kind of a different habitat, a different ecosystem, which is hardwood bottomland habitat, where most of the interaction with how things operate and work down there is based on flooding and water. That often sculpts the landscape in the heart of the Great Trinity Forest down here. As we have left the hustle and bustle of the city, we enter an environment that has changed very little since first European contact with this area. There is a wide swath of an archaeological site that's behind me that dates back approximately 2,500 years, or maybe even older than that, but we know from what archaeologists tell us in the professional work done here that we know that there have been humans that have been occupying this site, this place, this very historic, prominent place for at least 2,500 years. Most of the land ethic and conservation efforts that allowed Big Spring to become a historic landmark squarely rest on the shoulders of the late Billy Ray Pemberton. Billy Ray Pemberton instilled in all of us that have worked at Big Spring the ethic of conservation, recreation, and perspiration to maintain this site, not just the way it stands today, but for generations that are not yet even born. Big Spring exemplifies the work of how private conservationists, people that are citizens of Dallas, here in this neighborhood and beyond, have been able to successfully interface with municipal government, state government, and federal government, including the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and different project partners, including the University of North Texas, to help this place be the best that it can, while still maintaining the very natural look, and one that harkens back as a touchstone to the pioneer spirit that first settled Dallas, and also an awareness of the people that were here before Dallas was a city, the indigenous people that called this land home for millennia. We don't quite know who those folks are. We think that they might be Wichita or Caddo based, but we're not sure. We know that there have been many languages spoken here. We know that there have been a lot of different people who have lived here, worked here, buried their loved ones here at this site. And it's a real honor, I think, as contemporary Dallasites to appreciate a place like this. A place where so much human history has occurred, but the touches of the land have been so light. A place where, as we walk this morning, we can walk in the footsteps of those early pioneers. We can walk in the footsteps of President Sam Houston and his men. We can walk in the footsteps of indigenous people. We can be a part of their land and their experience, somewhere profound that exists right here in the heart of Dallas. So come with me. Let's go see what's down there.
So what were sort of your expectations upon your first visit here of what it would look like?
I expected it to be a semi-rural feel. Also maybe a place that had a profound feel to it, which this site does even today. My first interaction formally with the Pemberton family was a visit for breakfast one morning. I was invited along on a hike and unexpectedly got breakfast out of it. And the Pembertons are such nice people with the open door that they had for people to come visit and see their spring, their property. And even though we're inside Loop 12, it had this very rural feel to it. Felt like it harkened back to days of long ago. To a more simple time. And I hope in the future that simple feel to this site, a place that has very few modern human touches or even human touches at all, can be maintained from now into the future. And so this site had always been, from the 1880s until the city of Dallas acquiring the property, is used as a cattle and dairy farm. Just very light touches. Just when I first came here, there were only about half a dozen cows on the property. Had this real natural feel to it, other than this area behind us being was mostly just a grazing pasture for cattle. Since then, since there now is an absence of cattle, we've seen a lot of grass growth, both good and bad at this site, but it's just something that has to be managed every year in accordance to the management guidelines set forth in landmark protocols.
Okay. Let me ask you, what would you say some of the biggest threats are, you said, for human impact? Or
we're surrounded by millions of people at this site. This is a survivor. It's preserved basically over the decades through lack of commercialization, industrialization, and expansion, urbanization of this part of Dallas. So most of the area in the Great Trinity Forest here is preserved through neglect. It's preserved through people just not paying much attention to it over the last century as Dallas grew as a city. And those threats, those external threats to this place, are still here. But I think that as the city of Dallas has preserved it as an official landmark in perpetuity, that the chances of this being developed as a site will be very low going into the future. There's always a risk and concern of things like wildfires or a tanker truck spill that would impact possibly the groundwater aquifer here at the spring site itself. But I think that since there's a buffer zone, this wonderful prairie here serves as a great breathing space for the spring that's down below us. And that buffer protects Big Spring, the central focus, the water feature of this property, protects it from contemporary influences that could damage this site.
So how would you bring about more attention to the site while still trying to keep it preserved?
Sure. So one of the main efforts and one of the most important parts of Big Spring is education of the public and allowing citizens, this is public property, allowing docent-led, curated walks out here and we've had a number in connection with the City of Dallas and North Texas Master Naturalists and other organizations, group walks, activities, and open houses out here to help bring awareness to Big Spring and also allow folks, citizens of Dallas, and especially the neighborhood behind us here is one of those neighborhoods that just doesn't have a lot of park space, a lot of open spaces, a lot of safe walking spots. And this place is one of those areas where a lot of people live in a very urban area, don't get the opportunity to go out and seek out and experience nature. And this is it. This is like supercharged nature. And this area behind us, the further you walk, it becomes like a true wilderness for North Texas. And I hope that people in the future can experience that. People that are that want to experience nature, this is the place to do it. Currently, it's curated behind a set of private or gates that are locked. And the reason for that is that there's an archaeological site here, and also there are a lot of very fragile parts of the spring and the different spring habitats that are very sensitive to human footprints and human interaction. So for now, until a really great plan can come up with how to allow more people kind of free range access to this place, currently it's just kind of blocked off a little bit, which is kind of by design, but I hope that everyone can experience it. We're now at Big Spring, the spring itself, here in the heart of the Big Spring landmark in Dallas Great Trinity Forest. This body of water that you see behind me is the ancient water that flows from the aquifer that's beneath our feet. The water that you see here has been carbon dated 2 different times, and both times they date back to about, the water dates to about 1360 AD to 1400 AD. It's ancient water. It's pure water. It's one of the last free-flowing springs left in Dallas County and in North Texas. The water that emanates from the rocks behind me at the interface of the bank is pure water. It's free of coliform. It's free of impurities. It's one of the great last springs left in this part of Texas. The way the spring works is that there is a contact horizon in the bank here that separates the Pleistocene Trinity sands, which date back from the Wisconsin glaciation that were laid down by the Trinity River very long ago, and the bedrock in this area, which is a limestone called Austin chalk that dates back to the Cretaceous age. Where these two interfaces meet, the sand and the rock, the spring emanates from in 3 or 4 different areas. The spring water then aggregates in this area that's called the crawfish pond, mostly just due to all the crawfish that are in the water here, and then discharges out of the spring area and then travels a few hundred yards down to a place called Brine Slough, which is the first order stream for this area, that then feeds into White Rock Creek. This spring water then feeds into the Trinity River at the mouth of White Rock Creek, some half-mile distant from that. This clean water, this wonderful column of pure clean water, helps out an immense amount the watershed downstream from this spot where I'm currently standing down to where it interfaces with White Rock Creek and then the Trinity River. This water body, this spring discharges approximately 35 to 38 gallons of fresh water per minute. And over the course of the year, that equals roughly 12 million gallons of pure water into an imperiled 303 delisted Trinity River watershed. So a lot of the plants that you see here from lizard tail behind me to Sagittaria, arrowhead, and a lot of our insect species are real indicative of very clean water. You're not going to see a lot of the watercress and other plants and different things in an imperiled water body that you would see here at an area that is a pristine spring. So this spring has an amazing resilience to it. It discharges, as I mentioned before, 35 to 38 gallons a minute. It has almost a constant temperature of 65 to 66 degrees year-round. And I, as part of one of my Master Naturalist volunteer sites, test the water here once a month through the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment and the Texas Stream Team program. And the Texas Stream Team is a network of citizen scientists that have water testing sites assigned to them across the great state of Texas. It's very active in the Dallas area, especially in the White Rock Creek watershed, from the northern parts of Dallas, where White Rock Creek first starts, down into this part of southeast Dallas County, where the Trinity River flows through the Great Trinity Forest. I have two testing sites here. One is at the spring site itself, and then one is right where I'm standing. And so for the last 10 years, without missing a month, I've volunteered my time water testing here and produced some interesting trends on water quality, on discharge, on droughts and floods. I've tested temperature-wise here when the air temperature is at 0 during our great Snowmageddon event that we had a couple years ago. And then I've also tested in the summer of 2022 when the air temperature here was 112 degrees. So the interesting thing about this spring is that the water quality and the water temperature, despite what happens in the outside world, stays the same. This has been a focal point. This is one of the ultimate focal points of human history that's left in Dallas. And it's really fascinating in a place where the city of Dallas, by worldly standards, is a relatively new city on the world scale, that a place this ancient and old still exists right here in the heart of Dallas. So I mentioned how cool the water is. It's like 65, 66 degrees year round. And after a hike, or after I've done water testing at this location, one of the nicest things to do is to wash your hands off, get the dirt off your hands, and splash your face with water. It's very, very clean. The water that comes out of the spring emanates from the spring out of the rocks itself. I've tested and never seen any coliform or E. coli out of the water there. But at this site, it travels through a water body a little bit, and so it's almost as clean as drinking water, but not quite. So I'll kind of rinse off here and I'm standing underneath the boughs of the wonderful, magnificent, historic bur oak at Big Spring. The bur oak is a water-loving tree and has grown for many centuries next to the Big Spring discharge, and the Big Spring is directly behind me here. The spring feeds this magnificent bur oak, and over the centuries has sheltered it from drought, from cold, from heat, and any other kind of like environmental factors that often are detrimental to larger trees growing here in the Great Trinity Forest. This tree as an acorn began its life at a time when this part of Texas was likely a part of New Spain. Overseeing many centuries of humans, many generations of humans, rest under the shade of its boughs. President Sam Houston camped at this spot with his men on the night of August 13th, 1843, before beginning their travels the next day to the west to what is now Cedar Springs near Lemon and the Toll Road. When we look at a place like this, we think, what did Dallas once look like before Dallas was Dallas? And this is what it once looked like to a large extent. Big bur oak trees, large Shumard oaks, elms, pecans, and walnuts once dominated the landscape of what we now call downtown Dallas. Prior to European settlement of the area, we'd like to think that when Native Americans were on this site, standing in this place, standing where I am right now, where there's debitage pieces of artifacts, pieces of spoil that Native Americans left here when they were standing here just like I am today, talking, conversing, in an environment that has immense human beauty to it. The beauty here really does capture the human eye. There's also evidence up the hill here in past archaeological reports, not far from where I'm standing, perhaps 150 feet or so, where there was a human burial that was found in the 1840s. And we do not know who was buried there or how old that human burial was. It was relayed to an archaeologist by a farmer. So this is a sacred site. Native Americans, especially in this part of Texas and this part of the United States, always viewed springs as a place of neutrality, a place that no one called their own, a place that no one planted their flag. It was a place of harmony and spirit and peace. And I talked earlier about the Pembertons up the hill who've lived, their families lived on this property since 1880. And it's only really through their stewardship and conservation efforts and not changing anything to this place that has really been remarkable in saving it for future generations. A lot of folks would see a spring like this, if it was in their own property, and say, boy, it sure would be fun to dam up and turn into a swimming hole. Or we could use it as a waterworks to power a grist mill, or something used for lumber, or even timber all the trees. And while there has been impacts to this property with some gravel mining and a couple other things, this spring site, where we're standing now, this mod of trees and beautiful spring, looks a lot like it did 500 years ago. Real special. I'm standing now at the head of Big Spring, where the source of the spring water emanates freely from the rock and geology here in the Big Spring complex. At my feet is a contact horizon where Pleistocene sands from the last ice age meet our native bedrock, our Austin chalk limestone that dates back to the Cretaceous. It's at this place where the water emanates from the rock in several different places. Some early settlers called this White Rock Springs from the white rock that we see around the base of the dam and the Lowhead Dam here, the bank of the spring. And that's how one of the names of Big Spring. But this is where it comes out of the ground. It's 65 to 66 degrees year round, with a very low dissolved oxygen. It does not seem the atmosphere, so this water does not really have a component to it that's based on rainfall that we've received recently. When we've radiocarbon dated the water here, citizen scientists passed the hat around, got donations in the community for testing the water here to see how old it is. It dates back to about 1360 AD, which is a long time ago. That's, you know, back when the first cornerstone was laid at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. And that's how old this water is. What an ancient, awesome resource it is to have water like this that people can drink right from the source.
So what does this slough have to do with its namesake?
Bryan Slough is named for John Neely Bryan, who's widely credited with being the founder of Dallas. And in the late 1860s and early 1870s, he lived here at Big Spring, hence the name Bryan Slough. Bryan Slough, where we're standing, is a receiving water body several hundred yards upstream of Big Spring's discharge. Big Spring discharges 35 to 38 gallons a minute of fresh water into this water body. As it passes through the creek this way, through this small slough, it'll eventually enter White Rock Creek and then into the Trinity River itself. Half a mile each way, so about a mile distant from here is where this water will enter the Trinity River later on today. The uniqueness of this water body is its not just its clarity, but also its cleanliness. So we have a wide diversity of plants and animal species that call this part of the slough home that are extinct in other parts of the Trinity River watershed. So this acts as what we call a refugium for a lot of these different mussels and different things that need really super clean water in order which not just to survive but thrive. And here's where they do this. We're standing in a place that's really in the heart of the Great Trinity Forest. We have towering ash trees, beautiful swamp privet and box elder behind us. And oftentimes people ask, they often wonder, what did Dallas look like before Dallas was Dallas? And in the riverine habitats, in these habitats where it's bottomland forest, this is what it looked like. Or since we're kind of we're in the White Rock Creek watershed here, people wonder, what did White Rock Creek look like, or what did White Rock Lake look like before White Rock Lake was built? And the area that you see all around us here is very, very close to what White Rock Lake looked like before White Rock Lake was impounded and built back in the early 1900s. This place is really catalyzes what Dallas is. When people ask what is the native environment of the city of Dallas, what is the natural habitat it looks like, we've pretty much erased the natural environments and habitats here in the Dallas area, especially inside Loop 12. But this is one of the few last standing places where you can't hear the call of a siren or the drumbeat of a car going down the road. The sounds all around us are birds singing and calling and the slight rustling of breeze through the trees. And that's what makes this place so immensely special, how it is our greatest natural asset, which is the Great Trinity Forest where we're standing now.
Why is it important to keep this site preserved around Big Spring?
So we're just outside the Big Spring landmark, but we're in what's called the Big Spring Conservation Area, which is a 25-acre buffer zone that protects Big Spring from being developed or having other influences foisted upon it from outside influences in the future. I know that with the current administrations at City Hall, how much of Big Spring is still fresh in their minds and how they were vitally important members and pieces of having legislation and protections put in place. But in order to preserve this place, there needs to be an institutional memory at City Hall and with other governmental bodies that protects this spot. And this does that 25 acres. And even this crossing here, were it not for Big Spring, if Big Spring was not there, were it not for the magnificent brook, this spot in and of itself, which is a historic stream crossing for the Beeman and Pemberton families into the river bottoms beyond where they used to do a lot of farming, would serve as a real focal point of interest in human history for people that lived in the city of Dallas. The historic farm that stands here, and parts of it still stand here today with Pemberton families who live along Pemberton Hill Road. This is a real piece of Texana. It's a real piece that can tell the story of early pioneer settlement and development of Dallas from an agrarian economy to one that's much more urban. And this place does that. Where we're standing right now and the waters that flow beneath our feet tell that story.
Hello, everyone that's in the audience here physically and virtually online. My name is Ben Sandifer. It's the film showed. I'm an honorary Master Naturalist with the North Texas chapter here in the Dallas area. It's a privilege for me to be here in person or virtually, wherever you're watching me, to talk about something that's real near and dear and close to my heart, which is Big Spring and the Great Trinity Forest. I think that film, that's the first time I've seen that film. I think it actually encapsulates and covers a lot of the presentation I'm going to give. So it might seem a little bit redundant and nature, what I'll be talking about, but I'd like to expand on a few subjects that I covered in the film. So welcome, and let's go into a journey into the Great Trinity Forest. Big Spring is a place unique in Dallas. Dallas is a town on the world landscape is rather new. We're kind of not even into our teenage years, I don't think. I think we're still well into our childhood as a city in terms of growth compared to other metropolises and great cities across the world. But we do have a real fascinating history that's often long forgotten and kind of ignored. It often gets in the way of development here in the city. And that's our own natural history and our own human history. The depth of human history here is rather great when we consider the Native American presence that once dominated the landscape in this area before European settlement. So we're going to kind of get into that a little bit. We're also going to focus on some of the natural beauty and also what it means to work on some conservation efforts and preservation efforts inside the city of Dallas as private citizens, and how the story that I'm going to tell is really one of people and how people work together to save this special place. We're not for the work of private citizens, avocational scientists, so people that enjoy exploring nature and science in their free time. They have jobs as bankers, accountants, medical professionals, insurance salesmen, or whatnot. Got together and decided to work on this focal point of a unique property to save it from development. And it's been something that's been very worthwhile. It's provided excellent educational opportunities to the city at large, and has added to the mosaic or fabric of life, the quality of life for many Dallas residents to experience something that's so natural, unique, and profound right in their own backyards. Most of the people you see here in the photo are responsible for, there's a large cast of people that are responsible for the preservation and protection of Big Spring. One of the unique things about this photo is that we're standing in front of the Big Spring Texas historical marker that was placed, went through the 2014 tranche of applications for the Texas State Historical Markers, and was formally dedicated in May of 2015 at Big Spring. And the unique thing, I guess, about this photo is that although one or two people in this photo might have known each other prior to the start of their interest in Big Spring, everyone else were strangers. That they came from all points on the horizon and devoted their own time, not part of really any one singular organization, but a melting pot of organizations to bring their own specialties to bear to protect Big Spring. So while there might have been one or two different friends and things that were involved in this, most of these people in this photo were all brought together and did not know each other before they became advocates for Big Spring. I'd like to show you kind of a unique perspective on Big Spring, because you probably wondered, where is Big Spring? And we'll see if this video loads up. This is, I'm at the mouth of the spring here, and as we draw back in the footage, we're going to pull back and we see this, the immense pond here is about 75 feet in length, which is a discharge for Big Spring. Sagittaria, which is our arrowhead root. There's a lot of blue flag iris in here, some watercress, a lot of native plant species. You might have seen some sedges go by. And then we're going to go up. We're going to go up to the 72-foot top of the Big Spring burrow that's behind us here. And as we go up towards the top of the tree canopy, you can see the immense lot of elms and pecans and walnut trees. And as the camera pans around and we gain more altitude up into the 80 to 100 foot range, if we look off in the far distance here, what should pick up in the camera is downtown Dallas. Between downtown Dallas and Big Spring is the Great Trinity Forest. It's 6,500 to 7,000 acres of land, all public property, and acts as a carbon sink. It sucks up our carbon dioxide that we generate here in the city of Dallas. It releases oxygen. It also serves as a sponge that sucks up a lot of our floodwater from impermeable surfaces in the urbanized part of Dallas. And it acts also as this, basically through neglect, this wonderful wildlife refuge where nature's kind of taken over and repopulated areas that were clear cut over the last century into some of the great wildlife and natural spaces in the lower White Rock Creek drainage and in the Trinity River drainage. Really, really, really special place. And go to the next slide here. We're going to touch on like 4 different little parts of Big Spring. There's a lot of stuff I could even just talk for hours about each one of these little things, but there's an immense natural history. There's a human history to it, the spring hydrology, and the flora and fauna. Each one of those 4 things, if taken on its own, would make Big Spring a significant enough of a spot in this part of Texas to be really recognized as a special place. To have all 4 of those components here at one place, concentrated within a 40-acre space and really inside a 15-acre space, which makes up the landmark, really, really, really is makes this one of the most special places, not just in the state of Texas, but really deserves a lot of national recognition as well. I'd like to briefly show the City of Dallas land acknowledgement. I won't read the whole thing, but in regards to the Native American space and upon which Big Spring exists. But maybe I'll read like the last 2 sentences. And I think it's important that we recognize the American Indian peoples as original stewards of this land and the relatives within it. The acknowledgement is a small gesture to a large commitment to show respect through ongoing awareness and action. That's from the City of Dallas Planning and Urban Design Department. I hope that that message flows through all departments at City Hall, because places like Big Spring and other archaeological sites that are known but not curated really deserve the same protection that Big Spring does. To give you a perspective on where we are, I drew an arrow here, basically where I'm giving this presentation today, which is the Central Library in the City of Dallas. We're across the street from 1500 Marilla, which is City Hall. And we're about 5 miles distant to the southeast of where Big Spring sits. Between those 2 spaces I mentioned before, where is the Great Trinity Forest and what is it? It's 3 county nature preserves, 9 City of Dallas parks, 4 Corps of Engineers mitigation lands, and 65 equals to about 6,500 to 7,500 acres. The city and the Corps of Engineers are currently doing a survey to determine the exact size of the Great Trinity Forest. It's still unknown. It basically separates the northern parts of Dallas and the southern parts of Dallas. In the middle of the Great Trinity Forest, the Trinity River flows. It's been a kind of impediment to some degree for development on the south side of the Trinity River, as Dallas, after the World War II era, grew. It grew mostly north and northeast and northwest versus south, southeast, and southwest. And so where we have this great piece of open land floodplain has basically been it's part of Dallas that was largely not been paid much attention to, actually a blind eye turned towards it. So that's where the Great Trinity Forest exists. One of the secrets of the Trinity River is that the water is the lifeblood of the Trinity River. The river environment thrives on flooding events, where we can't build stuff as humans in the floodplain. Nature thrives in it. And so there are annual flooding events that lay down silt through oxbows and ephemeral ponds, sloughs, and abandoned gravel mines, and displaces a lot of water into these areas, which serve as tremendous wildlife habitat. I was in the Great Trinity Forest just this morning at dawn and saw river otters swimming, frolicking, not too far, let's see, about 3 miles from where I'm standing right now. White-tailed deer, ibis, all kinds. Birds from the neotropical areas of South America are all up into this part of Dallas County right now. It's really beautiful to see. And they all are in a lot of these smaller first order creeks, seeps, and springs. And that's where we're headed, is to Big Spring, which is right where water emanates out of the ground, the nexus of water. Dallas was built on springs. Early North Texas inhabitants relied heavily on natural springs. We have a lot of streets that still carry their names. Even small towns like Bach Springs, Cedar Springs, Keller Springs, just to name a few. And most of those springs are now gone. We don't have those anymore. City of Dallas even used a lot of its traditional water supply at the outset of the beginning infancy of Dallas. Browder Springs, which is where Old City Park is now, Kidd Springs and Oak Cliff, Buzzard Springs, where Fur Park is today, Honey Springs in the southeast part of Dallas, and Cedar Springs, which is in kind of the uptown area now. And I'll give you just one example, and that's Cedar Springs. Cedar Springs actually I've actually had a bond, an election to see which town was going to hold the county seat in Dallas County. Dallas County was formed. And it was a close win by Dallas to beat out Cedar Springs. At one time, it was a big time going concern and almost became, Dallas could have been called Cedar Springs instead of Dallas. Today, it's a footnote of history. And why is that? It's because, well, people damaged the spring, the city of Dallas grew up around it, and now the toll road's been built over it. So what now stands across the street from the Whole Foods on Lemon at the toll road, if you go into the park there, is a small monument to one of the great springs of Texas that no longer exists. It's kind of interesting to think about. So springs are very, in this part of Texas, robust. They used to exist here in great numbers, but are very fragile to human development. Big Spring existed pretty much because it was anonymous. It was not known about. There was a journal entry by Edward Parkinson, who's an Englishman that accompanied Sam Houston on his Birds Fork Treaty journey in August of 1843, which this happens to be the 180th anniversary this coming month of when Sam Houston moved through East Texas with his band of his treaty party into the mid-cities area. He spent one night, which many people believe, at Big Spring based on Edward Parkinson's diary. And they moved forth towards Bird's Fort, which is now in the Viridian development, the Arlington, Euless, Mid-Cities area. You should go check it out sometime if you're interested in history. Big Spring is not labeled on U.S. geological topo maps. It's not noted in the very famous Book of Record, which is Springs of Texas by Gunnar Brune. And it's discreetly been held between just about three families, the Beamans, the Bryans, and the Pembertons. And knowledge of this spring was not widely held by many. Beyond family, several curious, astute historians, archaeologists, and naturalists who sought it out through the years, it's not really known about too much. And that's kind of what's protected it. But it's also been detrimental to it because a lot of developers and outside folks that wanted to use the spring property, since there was no historical provenance formally written and attached to it, became an issue of having to start from square one to protect it. And so let's get in really close to the geology. I talked a little bit about it in the film a little bit. We have some interesting soils and vegetative regions in this part of Dallas. The soils at Big Spring go from like the top topographical high area is more indicative of a blackland prairie soil at the very top, the topographic high, but there's a thin veneer of that. Underneath it are the great Pleistocene sands that were deposited when the Trinity River during the last ice age was a larger, stronger river and carried a lot of sandy Pleistocene debris out of the Bridgeport area and deposited on shelves or terraces that the Trinity River previously carved out through the Austin chalk. So these sands and mud layers deposited on the terraces there. And I don't know if the Dallas Paleontological Society has a table out here today. I think they're supposed to. But you can ask them about the Rancho La Brea megafauna from the Pleistocene that has been found in this area. And it rivals that of what's found in the La Brea tar pits, same time frame. Dire wolves, mammoths, woolly mammoths, bears, Bison antiquus, all exist in the sandy area. And one of the best places to see this stuff is in the Great Trinity Forest. It's where it's exhumed, it's brought out in gravel pit mining excavations in the 1930s through 1950s. There's even a special saber-toothed cat species called Pembertoni, which is the last part of its name, the species name, which is actually named after Pemberton Hill and the Pemberton family was found on their property. So a previously undiscovered unique species of saber-toothed cat is there. Really super duper interesting. And the Trinity sands I'd mentioned, deposited during the Pleistocene, and it's important to know this because it's semi-permeable sand structure, which allows water to percolate down through the sand strata and then make contact with our bedrock in the area, which is Austin chalk limestone. And that creates two environments for us, which is really super interesting from a flora and fauna perspective, because at Big Spring, we have an upland area that's out of the floodplain, and we have a bottomland area that's in the floodplain. So we have this sandy post oak savanna uplands dominated by post oak, red oak, hickory, all of our prairie plant species, our big four grass species that are real indicative to the Blackland Prairie. Then we have a bottomland area, which is elms, cottonwoods, bur oaks, ash, pecan, and walnut, which make a living with their feet wet a lot of the time down in the floodplain. And that, in tune, is what creates the Big Spring. And a lot of the springs that used to exist in North Texas, where we have what's called a perched aquifer. So we have a water table that's confined underneath itself by an impervious layer, which is your Austin chalk limestone. And then way below this, you have your main aquifer, like Trinity aquifer is 1,000 feet underground and stuff. But this impervious layer, it's real shallow, like 50 to 75 feet in depth. We think that Big Springs water table has about 50 feet of bandwidth with these sands that form it. And we're not sure exactly how large the watershed is for Big Spring, but we think it's quite big. And then the contact horizons, where it makes contact with the atmosphere the first time, is where we have the spring side of Big Spring. Give you a little bit more perspective. I just spoke about it, but Big Spring's about 0.2 mile west of Pemberton Hill Road. It's situated at the base of the hill at 400 feet. And the spring's located right at about the 100-year floodplain. And this is what Big Spring looks like. It's one of the last free-flowing springs in Dallas County. You want to see what this looks like, kind of bubbling up out of the ground. It has a little bit of artisanal flow to it, so it has a little bit of back pressure to it a little bit as it comes out of the ground. But you can see the rock sandy structure here, the pebbles that are from the Pleistocene. And then it's a little bit hard to see. There's an Austin chalk limestone just beneath it. That's where that contact horizon and where this water comes out of the ground. And we've private citizens have tested this water twice, done carbon-14 dating on it to see how old the spring is. And the water that comes out of the ground, dates back to 1260 to 1400 AD is the age of it. So 600, 700-year-old water. A lot of what we had to know about Big Spring and how we had to protect Big Spring was we knew we had this wonderful place. We had to start from the square one, ground zero, in determining what Big Spring was and move forward with a series of protocols scientifically as citizens to reach the conclusion that Big Spring was, one, a natural spring and not a water leak. From upstream, or someone up the hill, or that someone's septic tank somewhere that ruptured, or someone had a garden hose stuck in the ground. We determined it wasn't. And a lot of the work that we had to do, since there's not been a book written about it, a journal, or any kind of formal, other than some archaeological records published about it, we had to use a lot of what we know from libraries, institutions such as this one. So Native American sites with resources available from the Texas Historical Commission, early Republic of Texas surveyors like Warren Ferris, who The Land is a Cry is an excellent book by, if you haven't read it yet, it's a great book on Texas surveyors in this part of Texas. Pioneer settlers, family biographies, histories, and news articles, and then early botany. A lot of it's curated at the Channel Research Institute of Texas, but some of our more famous local Dallasites, like the La Reunion botanist, Julian Rivershawn, is a great example of people who've done research and have herbarium collections in institutions across the world that have put forth a lot of information about Big Spring and the White Rock Creek bottom where Big Spring exists. Let's talk real quick about Native American sites. What Native American sites tell us about this area in general is that there are Native American sites, the Great Trinity Forest, that date from about 5000 BC to about 1600 AD. There are many, many Native American sites, and they're all protected under federal, state, and local laws, so you can't go out and dig them up if you're interested in that kind of thing. The earliest were hunter-gatherer bands who collected mussels, hunted animals, bison, deer, prairie dog, quail, and box turtles. There's a lot of evidence along the Trinity River where there are bison kill sites, and you can see where Native Americans have processed animals and had come out of probably East Texas, out of the woods, to interact with the plains during hunting seasons in late summer and early fall, when maybe animals were migrating through this area in greater abundance. There's later evidence, especially in some areas up White Rock Creek, in the Merriman Park area, up in the Lake Highlands area, where there's evidence of agricultural-based farming, and then mixed in with a hunter-gatherer component. And then their charcoal cooking fires tell us a lot about the kinds of resources they used to cook, use their cooking fires and stuff, which is kind of interesting to look back on. At Big Spring, there's a large Native American site that once covered the terrace surrounding the site. Anywhere you have springs in this part of Texas, there were or still are archaeological sites. Much of the site was disturbed by historic land uses through farming and gravel mining across the Big Spring site. And there's still undisturbed remnants that hold rich evidence of human habitation dating back thousands of years. So in 2012, 2013, that winter, Professional Archaeological Survey went out and worked on some properties. And they dug 1 square meter holes, went down 1 meter, and just in those 3 square meter areas, they uncovered 3,105 artifacts just in 3 square meter digs, just test plots. And so there's a vast archaeological site that's yet to be tapped into and studied. And the main effort here was to preserve it so that it would be known that the area should be protected and preserved. And it's in the work that the archaeological company did, recommended that Big Spring and the site there be eligible for the National Register of Historic Places and also eligible for a state antiquities landmark if the city has decided to pursue it. So that even just the eligibility protects it from any kind of development. So early surveyors I mentioned tell us that they're about the first military roads to the area, 1830s. There's a large survey area that you can look at on the General Land Office website that will give you information on what surveyors found in certain areas when this part of Texas was virgin. As we move into the European pioneer settlement area, this is super important for to know about, is because it's how Big Spring came into its own. So just really quickly go over that. The Treaty of Bird's Fort, which was signed in 1843 in September, was what transformed this part of Texas from what many would call a wilderness into an area that was open for European habitat and occupation. And Big Spring was noted in August 1843, as I mentioned earlier, as one of the campsites as the group was moving, Sam Houston's group was moving from East Texas into this part of North Texas. Very important, there were members of the tribes there that accompanied Sam Houston on his trip, members of the Delaware, members of other tribes in East Texas that acted as scouts and interpreters. And their stories, another one that's largely been left and untold by contemporary historians. Quick history on the land ownership of Big Spring. John Beeman, who's widely regarded really as, I know John Neely Bryan was labeled the father of Dallas, but John Beeman was really the one that created a lot of firsts for Dallas County. He first legislator, first guy that brought law and order to the region, first guy that plotted a crop of corn. We'll go real quick through these. John Beeman had 9 tracts of land inside Dallas County, which was then known as Nacogdoches County. 3 in particular that were important for this conversation is he owned some pieces east of downtown Dallas. So east of Fair Park was a Cedar Break tract. His family has a cemetery behind the Jewish cemetery off Dolphin Road, if you're familiar with that area. At the Beeman Family Cemetery, real interesting to visit. That's on their old property there, open to the public. And then he had the Prairie Tract, which is in formal Pleasant Grove. And then this kind of pink outlined area is a piece of ground called Big Spring Tract. And that's where Big Spring gets its name. He coined the name. The Beemans owned the property from 1842 to 1880. They were veterans of the Republic of Texas, military campaigns from the War of 1812 all the way through the Mexican War. And they were entitled through Toby script to a number of land parcels. And so many of them that they picked out were in this part of Texas. John Beeman lived on the west bank of White Rock Creek, but east of what is now Dolphin Road. John Beeman passed away in 1856. He was a patriarch of the family, had a number of children. One of his children was Margaret Beeman. Margaret Beeman being a young woman out on the prairie, and John Neely Bryan being a young man on the prairie, married. And John Neely Bryan married into the Beeman family, marrying John Beeman's daughter, Margaret Beeman Bryan. Margaret Beeman inherited about half of the Big Spring tract, like 161 acres. And they later, after the Civil War, moved to Big Spring from about 1868 to the early 1870s. John D. Bryan passed away in a sanitarium in Austin in the late 1870s. And Margaret Beeman held on to the land until she sold it to, there she is in front of her cabin at Big Spring, to Edward Case Pemberton, also from Illinois. He bought the land from Margaret Beeman Bryan, because he wanted the spring, he saw the opportunity for the spring to become a dairy farm. And he ran a buttermilk dairy farm out of this locale for a number of decades until his untimely death in 1914, when he was murdered at his mercantile store at the base of Pemberton Hill Road and what is now US Highway 175 with the Kaufman Road. He had 7 sons. His property was divided 7 different ways, and it really impacted the land use going forward, from timber operations to gravel mining to just leaving some of the land alone. They occupied a space of land between Highway 175 and what is now Loop 12 or Great Trinity Forest Way. And that impacted what happened with Big Spring into the future. Is there's some gravel mining around. It's one of the brothers wanted to gravel mine the actual spring. The other one paid him off and said, "I'll pay you not to mine the spring." That's what really protected that. And that was the grandfather or the father of Billy Ray Pemberton, we'll get to in a second. So this is Edward Case Pemberton's home site right here. In this area, we had a real historic cabin. And then Billy Ray Pemberton is the grandson of Edward Case Pemberton. He's really the driving force and conservation father of Big Spring. He passed away this past November. And through his 40 years of tending to living on the property, put together a like homegrown, homespun naturalist perspective as a farmer. He was a firefighter with the Dallas Fire Department and a wonderful father. So he spent countless hours, countless years of his life dedicated to preserving Big Spring and conservation, not after reading a nature book or a nature guide.
Recording stopped.
Looks like the recording stopped. I guess y'all, the Zoom thing out of too. So, but Billy Ray Pemberton is super important to the legacy of Big Spring when we celebrate that. His work goes on through us today as members of citizens of Dallas, residents of Dallas, and his work ethic, land ethic, and perspective on life, it rings through every bit of these woods that we walk today. A trip to the Pemberton farm is like a trip back in time. If you ever had grandparents or family that lived in rural settings, a trip down here inside Loop 12 takes you back to your childhood, an earlier era of time. He used to lead a lot of walking tours where he had a really unique, he didn't know the scientific name for plants, but he knew what each plant did. And he'd tell you all about it. And then we'd say, well, this is, such and such a plant. And he'd say, yeah, I know that's what it does. You touch it, it will sting you, or whatnot. And he had a really unique perspective for a time long gone by. In his work, one of his 2 focuses was getting the spring protected for future generations, and also to get a historical marker on his property. And he did just that. In fact, he and Michael Torter, who was a Beeman descendant, really led the charge to get the historical marker. From 2003, 2004 to present, the city of Dallas has owned the property, and that brought in a new era of change, winds of change, and some headwinds with maybe possible development into Big Spring. And that's what really brought forth, since it became public property, a unique opportunity for citizens to have their own opinions and input brought into this, the fray here. And that also, after a lot of conversations, a lot of talks at City Hall, a lot of the science that we as citizens brought to the table with our due diligence regarding flora and fauna studies, water testing, historical narrative, it presented an opportunity to work with the City of Dallas and some of their funding opportunities to bring in some of their federal project partners and institutions of higher learning to help fund some planning projects, removal of some debris and different things, and really bring this place to where it needs to be as not just a state historic landmark with the Texas Historical Commission, but also protect the city, have the city protected from itself in regards to bringing forth the City of Dallas landmark. So the City of Dallas landmark
was the first city of landmark that's kind of a natural designation. So most city landmarks will note the paint on the building, what kind of floor they have, shutters, windows, specifications on what kind of sidewalk it is. In this case, the city of Dallas had to use trees, plants, and animals as part of the landmark designation. And so it became a fascinating thing where we had to wax poetic about the bur oak tree, or we had to wax poetic about the grasses and the trees that need to be protected and how important they are. So it's a unique opportunity to lay groundwork, hopefully, for another native natural landmark inside the city of Dallas in the future, if we can find one that might be of interest. There are a lot of punch lists for criteria. We actually, I think, probably got, other than the architectural feature, I think we actually got some of the natural. Anyways, it was difficult, but once we got our foot in the door with the landmark designation, the process was fun and exciting. I know not just for the city employees, but for the city at large. It got a lot of press and news coverage because the city was doing something great for its great Trinity forest. The landmark went through from 2013, started in 2013 and made it to the city council on April 27, 2016, when it became official City of Dallas landmark, just like the Adolphus Hotel or Dealey Plaza or Fair Park or a lot of these other buildings and places in Dallas that are real special. It now holds that same distinction and protection. So once again, there's the spring location, like a little tiny 4 there. Look closer, you can see the acreage here. It's 15 acres that encompasses an archaeological site and the spring and a couple other things. We have Big Spring Preserve at 40 acres, which is a buffer zone I talked about in the film. The buffer zone there protects the smaller 15-acre preserve from being impacted from future influences of the outside world. There's an upper terrace prairie area, which had historic uses as a home site, a grazing area for animals. And like I mentioned, provides critical buffer and recharge zone for natural spring. There's wildflowers and winter grasses, and there's also leftovers from a time when there was a cattle pasture. So you have some Bermuda, hedge parsley, and a little bit of Johnson grass that gets in there that can often make management a challenge. This is what it looks like in the springtime with a lot of what we call vine cup growing on the prairie there. And then the upper terrace area, this is the vine cup on the left, early in the morning before it kind of opens for the day. We have a lot of gaillardia, which is the red flower here, and some hedge parsley. This whole terrace here is a Native American site. As you can see, if you're camping out, it'd be a pretty nice place to camp out. And this is our Big Spring, the historic bur oak tree. It's estimated to be over 300 years old, over 70 feet tall, has 12-foot circumference, it grows within 15 feet of the spring, and has shaded people for many generations. This is what it looks like currently. Big Spring does in the height of the summer, but you can really get a perspective on it, what it looks like after like a snowfall. This is about 5-6 years ago. What the spring looks like. The head of the spring's over here. Water flows in and out of this little pond here until it hits Bryan Slough, a few hundred yards away, and then White Rock Creek, and then the Trinity River points south. Eventually, the Gulf of Mexico, about 412 miles away from where the head of the spring is. Bur oak was designated in 2014 by Texas Historic Tree Coalition. It's Bur oak 101, it's a historic tree, and so they have information on their website regarding the nomination and dedication of that tree. And they also have put down a small marker approved by the City of Dallas Landmark Commission, small plaque down there at the base of the spring, which gives a small narrative about the spring itself. As you move, the other component of Big Spring, as you move away from the spring, is the ash-dominated and hickory-dominated bottomland west of the spring into Bryan Slough. So this is very characteristic of what the rest of the Great Trinity Forest looks like beyond 6,000 acres of hardwood bottomland forest. Really super beautiful. We have some ragweed here in the foreground, in the background, large carpets of Virginia wild rye. They're just starting to go to seed right now. We have pockets of meadows. Eastern Blue Star, I think the Dallas Cowboys or City of Dallas ever had a plant for its name. This looks a lot like the Dallas Cowboys. It's kind of like in the willow family. It's rare. It's hard to find different places, but at Big Spring it grows with great profusion. Beyond that, we have a clasping coneflower field, which is one of the largest natural wildflower fields in the city of Dallas. All this stuff comes up on its own. It's only mown infrequently, maybe once every couple of years. And it's a monoculture of clasping coneflower species, which is a wetland wildflower plant. We had a lot of original management goals that went into the landmark process, and this really gets into what Master Naturalists are good at, is helping develop short-term and long-term strategies that we can implement along with project partners. The city of Dallas brings along. And so we were able to get rid of a lot of invasive species initially around the spring and develop a clear objective-based methodology going forward on print that we could work towards some short-term goals that were really achievable. And that also includes just kind of boosting plant species that would attract more wildlife. Long-term, which has been a lot more difficult to do, especially with COVID getting in the way, is keeping up some of these conservation efforts. We can do that on a smaller basis individually, but it's hard to get larger groups in there and doing some of these projects. We're working on that currently. Now we're getting into the last part of my talk, which is the citizen science of Big Spring, which is really just a catalyst for everything that's occurred at Big Spring. We have a wide diversity of flora at Big Spring. We have only over 400 species of plants that have been documented at Big Spring as of 2023. It was first started by Jim Barnum, who's a longtime master naturalist who's no longer with us. Was a real plant expert. And those 400 species and the matrix of the prairie and bottomland species together really make this place a really unique focal point of botany to study because of all the plants that are naturally here. We've also brought in a lot of plants. We've planted a lot of, done over 1,000 3-gallon plantings of things we've harvested from a nursery that is now gone out of business. We dug up a lot of stuff in the Arlington area, brought to Big Spring and transplanted a lot of our big 4 prairie grasses. And to give you an example of, and this is kind of maybe one of the most important parts, we did a lot of small caliper tree plantings, just very small, like almost like Sharpie marker width size diameter trees and stuff at Big Spring 6, 7, 8 years ago. And a lot of these small saplings have now grown. This is a bur oak. And that's now like over 12, this tree in 2022, winter 2022, was over 13 feet tall, this is bur oak. And there are a number of trees we planted. We planted, I think, 200 mast bearing trees, so trees that produce fruit, nuts, and things like that, that are real draw for a lot of different wildlife species that are, these kind of species of trees are kind of absent in the Great Trinity Forest to a great degree. So we've been populating Big Spring with a lot of these tree species. And I think you've all heard the old adage, the best time to plant a tree was yesterday, and second best time to plant one's today. And so I hope you all kind of take that to heart, that if you can plant, get out and encourage the city of Dallas, or do even yourself, to plant trees in the Great Trinity Forest, to encourage more biodiversity. How just 6, 7 years later on down the road, a lot of times people will plant trees and say, oh, you plant a tree knowing that you never live long enough to live in the shadow or the shade enough to appreciate the tree that you planted. Here you can do that if you plant them in the right environment, real neat. And that leads to a lot of the animal species that are now attracted to Big Spring. We see a lot of more biodiversity of our mammals and insects and everything, because we have all these really interesting diversity of plant species. And so this is a Big Spring buck that we saw with some Master Naturalist interns a year or 2 ago out in the classic coneflower field. Look at the tremendous rack on the sides. This is during rut season. It's busy chasing around a couple of doe out in the field. But we have over 200 avian species, bird species, been now documented at Big Spring. There are a whole host of mammals and reptiles and amphibians and vertebrates and insects that call Big Spring home. So it's really been, the citizen science part, real interesting to show. And then, kind of finally to wrap up my talk, is the Texas Stream Team. When we have now celebrated 10 years, celebrating Big Spring as a water monitoring site. We've not missed a month yet, so it's 120 tests or 240 tests total over those 10 years to test 2 different sites. And this data has been very important for a lot of scientific efforts elsewhere and abroad, because this is part of Texas where springs really often aren't studied very much. And this gives us a lot of data on what we can see spring-wise in a part of Texas where we no longer use water from artisanal or aquifer sources as our main drinking water supply. We drink all of our water from reservoirs, unlike other parts of Texas farther south where they use aquifers, which is not really studied. So here we've done training in the snow and in the heat. We also have a lab at Castle in the Closet for the Love of the Lake, which it has a table out here at the event today. This is Richard Grayson, head of Aquatic Alliance, taking a picture of some of the species of plants out there. And there's a whole kind of underwater world in Big Spring. These are Gambrusia, which are mosquito fish. The water quality, the water is so clear, it looks like a lot of these fish are just kind of floating in air in the background. And it's just its own underwater world, microclimate, where the water is always like 65, 66 degrees, like a cave. And where you usually see a lot of these fish go dormant in the wintertime, they only know springtime. They only know like what air conditioned world of 65, 66 degrees looks like. So water quality of the spring produces roughly at 35 to 38 gallons a minute of water. It did average about 35 gallons a minute from 2013 to 2017. It's now more like 38 gallons a minute. Get about 18 million gallons of discharge annually to the Trinity River, which is an impaired water body. The temperature is about 65 degrees. And the samples that we carefully obtain from the source are always free of E. coli and coliform, which is kind of indicative of pollution in the water. We can look at graphs. I bet you didn't think you'd have to look at graphs on a Saturday, but here we are. For water quality monitoring, you can look at the, you'll see a trend line where we have these spikes in E. coli that go up and down, and then it drops off here. And one of the things that we worked really hard on at Big Spring is to have a feral hog trapping program initiated, and one of the first citywide, and help develop that with the city of Dallas. And one of the first things we did was have a feral hog corral trap put into Big Spring. And just after we had it put in, I think it was put in about right in this area here, saw a dramatic drop off and had more very little feral hog activity at Big Spring the last like 5 years or so. And that's where you can kind of get that graph. The other is flow. We see a trend when there were some illegal uses of water in the aquifer, or people were sucking it out and draining some water in some nearby farm. And we've slowly seen an increase in water flow at Big Spring over the last several years. Very interesting data coming out of that. This is what the dick thistles look like, the kind of troubadours of the prairies I mentioned in the film, that you can currently see out there. They're prairie species that live out there. Mississippi kites, real popular this time of year. You can see they eat bugs for a living. You can see a little bug that's getting ready to catch with its talons. Indigo buntings, which have the bright indigo blue color to them. Painted buntings, which is its close cousin that in Mexico, I think their name is called Siete Colores, because it looks like some kid with a coloring book colored in all the different colors of this bird. Or the ever-present year-round red-tailed hawk that lives on the property, and blue boy, the kestrel, which is a favorite of the Pemberton family. And finally, throw in one more, which is a real interesting bird, unique bird for a lot of birders, is the Harris sparrow, which looks like they call it the I-35 bird. Real hard to find in the northern United States this time of year, but really one of our rarest birds that are real common here in the Dallas area in the winter. And then finally, a barred owl, which also lives in the property down in the woods. I want to thank you all for trudging through with me through the talk and stuff. And I didn't see anybody fall asleep, so that's a good thing. And I thank you all so much for attending the lecture and the privilege of your time on Saturday. I also have a website, Big Spring Dallas. You'll decide to look it up. There's just some cursory information there, some little sketches of history and things like that. And then we also have, there's a lot of data on iNaturalist.org and eBird, which is run by Cornell University with bird lists and things if you want to dig down on it. And also the Texas State University Texas Stream Team website through Meadows Center of Water and the Environment. And that's a lot to remember. But they have a lot of water data if anyone wants to really dig in and look to see if someone is testing in your neighborhood for water, or if you want to look at some of the Big Spring water data. It's all there. You can download it and play with it to your heart's desire in Excel. So, but it's been a wonderful opportunity as a citizen scientist. Actually, from when I first met the Pembertons across a barbed wire fence, shaking hands with them, I didn't know any of this stuff. And it's been a unique opportunity for me on a personal level to be the guy that attends a lot of lectures like this, sitting in the back of the classroom with a notepad or whatever, just kind of auditing and sitting down, listening, learning from others. And that's how I learned. And I hope that you too can kind of pull away from information sometimes by learning from some of these talks and presentations with people that don't have a professional background in any of this, but really consider it a passion of theirs in their lives. So.